Mmm, that first sip though. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are as well. Much love to you OGs who keep coming back, and if you're new to my channel, very warm welcome to you. I hope everybody is doing well. How is everybody's reading going? Here we are, it's April. Did everybody have a good Easter? I hope they did. It was just another day of eating chocolate for me. I do have one bit of really fun news to share with you. I just found out yesterday. I will be working part-time at an independent bookstore. I just got hired yesterday. I'm so excited. I'm so thrilled. I'm not going to say the name of the bookstore just yet, but if you look up best independent bookstores in the Savannah, Georgia area, it'll be on that list. So I'm super excited. I can't wait to share more about it. I'll let you know when I know when I'm supposed to start. Like, dream job, hello. And just as a side note, I believe next weekend, I want to say the last Saturday in April, is Independent Bookstore Day. So make sure you Google that. If you live by any independent bookstores, I'm sure they'll have events and sales. And if you have more than one in your area, try doing an independent bookstore crawl like I did. Not last year, maybe the year before, I can't remember. So much fun. Let me know down below if you plan on doing something for Independent Bookstore Day. One other piece of admin I want to share with you is that Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot and Gemma at Gemma Books are doing a readathon for May, and it's called Misery May, and they each do a video. I was able to participate in Gemma's video of lots of booktubers recommending sad books, miserable books, books that will make you cry, books that will upset you in some way, but in the best way. So I'm going to link their channels and their videos with all the recommendations down below. So if you're in the mood to participate in Misery May, check those videos out. And you'll get to see which miserable book I recommended. But today what we're going to talk about is the books that I have read or attempted to read in the first half of April. If you've watched my recent videos, you know I am slowly making my way through the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, and I have read a couple more. I don't think I'll be able to read the entire long list by the time the short list gets announced, but I'm doing my best. There might be 2, possibly 3 that I don't get to. So the first book I'm going to talk about is the first book that I attempted to read in April. Not only is it my first DNF from the Women's Prize, but it is my first DNF of the year. And that is Glory by No Violet Bulawayo. I attempted to listen to this, which might have been my first mistake. I watched Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf talk about her experience reading Glory. She read it for the Booktube prize and she did not have a good experience, and she listened to it and she said it was quite shouty. And I would have to agree with Alice. There was something about the narrator in combination with the subject matter. It's a political satire. The narrator has a lovely voice, and she has I want to say, I'm not sure which region, but African accent that I find really wonderful to listen to. But I think the subject matter of the book, it sounded like she was someone you listen to at a protest, saying you must do this and you must listen here. I found it quite jarring as well. So if you don't know, this is, like I said, it's a political satire. It is inspired by the unexpected fall by coup in 2017 of Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, except all the characters in this story are animals. So it does have a little Animal Farm flavor to it, but I think it is much darker. It's much more serious. It just wasn't a book for me. I could tell it was well written. This was a political story that just didn't resonate with me. And it's not like I don't like to learn about things that I am unfamiliar with, but I just found maybe I would have been more engaged if it was people rather than animals. And that's not to say I don't like stories that the animals are the main characters. I loved Laylene Paul's Pod. Absolutely loved it. Different type of story. I think with this type of content, I don't know. I loved Animal Farm as well. So I'm not sure why I didn't get along with this book, but I couldn't go on with it. I probably gave it maybe 10% before I gave up. You know, the older I get, the more comfortable I get DNFing a book. I just don't have time to read a book that I'm not enjoying. I just don't think we should spend time reading books that we don't enjoy. So sadly, I DNF'd Glory from the Women's Prize. What are you gonna do? So as per usual, when I DNF a book, it puts me in a minor reading slump. Not a big one, just a little bit. And I usually have to get through that slump reading short stories or graphic novel. And there were a few free standalone short stories that were available on Audible. The first one of which was My Evil Mother by Margaret Atwood. Now, I took a risk with this because I don't have a good history with Margaret Atwood, but it was only a couple of hours long, if that, and so I gave it a go, and I actually really enjoyed it. So this follows a mother and a teenage daughter. I can't remember their names. I'm not even sure they were given. It tells basically how the mother used witchcraft to keep her daughter in line. I'm not saying actually like used witchcraft to come up with potions to make her daughter consume or anything. Like, no, she talked about curses and she talked about doing certain things, and if her daughter did certain things, then it would have certain consequences or certain unfavorable outcomes. And I found this so relatable because in this story, it is a single mother and an only child daughter, and that's how I was raised. I was raised as an only child. My mom was a single parent. She had to be creative to keep me in line, especially when I got to be a teenager. But I remember as a child, one of the things that she would do, if she asked me something where she thought that I might lie about it, because if telling the truth, I would get in trouble, as children do, she would ask me the question, I would answer. She could tell immediately if I was not telling the truth, but she would lift up my hair and she would act like she was reading my forehead. She would act like the truth would be on my forehead, or whether or not I was lying would be written across my forehead. And she did this, and I immediately succumbed and would tell the truth. So it worked. I can appreciate when parents use certain tactics to get the truth out of their kids or to make them behave a certain way. So I found this story really relatable. I enjoyed it. I liked the writing style, which is unusual for me with Margaret Atwood. It was very much unlike anything else I've read by Margaret Atwood. Yeah, I enjoyed it. And I'd recommend it. I gave My Evil Mother 3.5 stars. So as I was on a roll with free short stories on Audible, and I decided to go with another one, and I read The Best Girls by Min Jin Lee. This one was actually recommended to me by one of you lovelies. I don't remember who it was, so if it's you, comment down below so I can thank you personally. But after I banged on and on about how much I love Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, you, whoever you are, recommended this on Audible, and I listened to it, and yes, I really enjoyed it. It was heartbreaking, but it's one of those stories, it's short, but it packs a punch. It follows a young girl and her family in Seoul, Korea. You're learning about a certain culture in Korea where girls are not necessarily favored. It's the boys who are favored, and they are treated as if they're the ones who are going to take care of the family, so they get all the opportunities education-wise, and they get the attention, and they get the lion's share of the financial aid, because in everybody's eyes, they're the ones who are going to be able to provide the family with dignity and wealth. The narrator, she's an excellent student, but she knows what good girls do for their families, and she's got, I believe, 3 sisters, and then she has, it might be 1 brother. And I'm not going to spoil this story for you, but it's one of those stories where you're just kind of following kind of a slice of life in this traditional poor Korean family. You're reading along, it's lovely, you're engaged, you're minding your own business, and then bang, the ending happens. You're like, what just happened? Why do you hate me? It's like that. That's all I'm going to say. If you fancy a good short story that will rip your heart out and punch you in the face at the same time, give it a go. I gave The Best Girls 3.5 stars. The next book I read is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin. This is another Women's Prize long list book, and I'm just going to say right now, I absolutely loved this book. I knew that I was going to like it. This is one of the books that I knew I wanted to read, that I knew that I would enjoy, but I was completely taken by surprise by how much I loved this book, how much I loved the story, how much I loved the writing, the structure, everything about this book I loved. Oh, and side note, I picked this book up in my very first trip to the independent bookstore that I am now employed by. And I don't usually buy hard copies, but with so many of the books on the long list being really new, I'm actually filming on April 18th, and it was only today that Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks became available, at least in the United States. Just started listening to it today. Spoiler alert. But anyway, so many books on the long list are recent publications, so I couldn't not get this book, and it's beautiful. So what is it about? So it starts off in, I want to say 1974, 75. It's just towards the end of the Vietnam War. You're following a Vietnamese family, specifically An, who is the oldest child. And she is one of, I want to say 5 children-ish. And her and her 5 brothers and sisters live with their parents. They're poor, but they need to get out of Vietnam, as many, many people did. This is inspired by true events where many Vietnamese people left Vietnam after all the American troops left the country because of what the Vietnamese government was doing to their own people. An's uncle, who lives in the United States, who left in a similar way successfully, shared a plan with An's dad on how to get out of the country, and they paid somebody to travel by boat to Hong Kong. They would stay there in some kind of quarantine camp for a few weeks before they gained passage to the United States. Because their family was so big, they were in 2 boats. And then tragedy strikes. The boat that An was in with her 2 younger brothers made it to Hong Kong, but the boat containing her other siblings and her parents didn't make it. So An has to, I believe she's 16 or 17 at the time. Her brothers are of an age where they need taken care of. And she has to grow up pretty much overnight. And this follows her story of taking care of her brothers, surviving the world on her own without her parents. Something happens where they are unable to go to the United States and they end up in London instead. It follows their lives as An tries to take care of her younger brothers, tries to survive, lead her own life as well among the politics at the time in England and the racism at the time. Now, this story is told in multiple timelines with multiple perspectives. One of the perspectives that I thought was interesting is from Dao, her youngest brother, who perished in the journey. He is giving his perspective. He's watching over An and the 2 brothers, Min and Tan. There's only a few chapters where you're getting Dao's perspective, but I thought that was really interesting. Most of the chapters have a heading of the date and where they are so that you kind of follow along. And then Dao's chapters has his name, so you know it's his perspective. And then there's a few chapters that just have the heading of an asterisk. And for the longest time, at least I didn't know whose perspective this was. And you find out towards the end of the book whose perspective it was, and it's lovely. And I just want to say the writing style was stunning. I absolutely love this. I would say that I would recommend the physical copy just because of multiple timelines and because of that asterisk. It might be a little bit confusing if you're not reading the physical copy, but beautiful, beautiful writing, engaging story. This book explores racism and generational trauma, and the way the author handles generational trauma is probably the best I've seen. It seems like I've read quite a few books recently that deal with generational trauma. I think it's a hot topic right now. I think it's a hot button. This is probably the best handling of it that I've read so far. It also explores grief in a really beautiful way. There's a couple of passages that I made a notation of that I want to share with you. This is just a passage of when An and her 2 brothers arrive in Hong Kong, and how well the author writes what An is feeling when they get to that destination with only part of their family. They had arrived at their penultimate destination in a journey that had lasted almost 2 years, a journey that had broken their family and turned their lives upside down with ferocity and abruptness. Now that they were here, An was dizzy with excitement and fear, but also dragged down by an abiding sadness for having reached the finish line alongside only a third of their team. And then there's another passage about grief that I thought was gorgeous. There is a proper way to grieve in the eyes of others, not too little, not too much, but there is a part of grieving that occurs behind the curtains, a part that is just for us and the deceased. And I suspect it is in this private communion, away from the crowd and the judgment, that we can find solace. Oh my goodness. And then there's another couple of pages towards the end, so it is more of a recent timeline during the COVID epidemic and the racism, the outward racism that anybody of Asian descent was a victim to during the time of COVID. She just writes a few paragraphs about it, and it's heartbreaking and it's embarrassing to know that people do this. But if you have the book, it's page 216 and 217, and I just think the author just did a wonderful job conveying those actual incidents. Really beautiful story. I absolutely love this. This was 5 stars all the way. Highly recommend it. There aren't enough historical fiction novels that cover this particular time period. I'm really, really hoping to see this on the short list. I'd be really, really shocked if it didn't go onto the short list. So 5 stars, Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn. Next book I read is Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. I'd been looking forward to this book when I saw that it was on the list for the Booktube prize, but of course I picked it up as it is longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. This is set in Northern Ireland during what's known as the Troubles, and this is the conflict with Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. Some say it was kind of a conflict between Protestants and Catholic, but I think religion is collateral damage to the actual conflict of what was more of a ethno-nationalist conflict. And that's just very, very, very surface level. It was a conflict that lasted about 30 years, starting in the early 60s. And I believe this particular story takes place, I want to say in the mid-70s, so right in the thick of it. You're following Kushla. She's a young woman. She's about 23 years old, lives in Belfast. She's a single young woman living with her mother, who is an alcoholic. And she works at her family-owned bar with her brother. Kushla and her family are Catholic. One day she meets Michael, who has kind of made a name for himself as a barrister defending members of the IRA. He is not only Protestant, but he's also married. They strike up a relationship and engage in an affair. Kushla, who also works as a teacher, one of her students' father is savagely beaten one day, and it has to do with the Troubles, and it sets off kind of a chain of events. And the story goes from there. I've heard a lot of people kind of put off by this story because the bulk of the first half is basically following Kushla's affair with Michael, and it talks a lot about their relationship. And a lot of people are kind of put off by the adultery, and I get that. I don't have a problem reading about that. Not that I condone it or anything like that. It's just not, to me, it's just kind of a fact of life, sadly. It doesn't make a character unlikable as a whole for me. You know, good people making bad decisions. What I found disappointing was I was expecting more about the Troubles, more about the conflict. And this was more about how that conflict affected people on a much more micro level, which is not bad. This was just a very slow moving story, but really the Troubles were like in the background of this affair between Michael and Kushla. The other problem I had, and this was more of a me thing, is I had a hard time following which characters were on which side of the conflict. You know, obviously you have your Catholics and the Protestants, and they had their conflict, but some folks where the religion just didn't come into play. It was more of an ethno-nationalist conflict. I just had a hard time figuring out which side each character fell on, other than Kushla and Michael. But going back to Kushla, adultery doesn't make me not like a character outright. And I don't think you're meant to empathize with Kushla, but she's not unlikable. She's a teacher. She loves her students. She actually has this friendship with one of her students, Davy, who is the son of the character who gets beaten up, and she bonds with Davy. She has an emotional connection with Davy, and she tries to help her family, and she gets in trouble at school because of this. And Davy as a character was just lovely. I just love Davy, and I love that part of the story. But most of the book was just very, very slow moving. But then the last, I want to say 50 pages, it's hard for me to tell because I listened to this. Oh, which by the way, I really enjoyed the narrator. It's told in an Irish brogue that is just delicious. I absolutely love that. So I would say the last maybe hour was really, really good. Really good. Stuff happens. I couldn't listen to it enough. As I'm listening to the story, it was going to be 2.5 stars, but the last 50 pages elevated it for me. I gave Trespasses 3 stars. The next book I read was Berserker by Keanu Reeves. There are other authors too, Matt Kent, Ron Garney, and Bill Crabtree, I believe, between the writing and the artwork and the illustrations and all that, but this was an idea by Keanu Reeves. I'm a huge Keanu Reeves fan. This is the first in a series that I decided to pick up. And to be honest with you, this story isn't necessarily one that I gravitate towards. I picked this up mainly because it was written by Keanu Reeves. This is more my husband's cup of tea, but I was curious. I read it in one sitting. This follows B. He's the main character. He's half man, half god. He's been around for tens of thousands of years. He is immortal. In present day, he is used by the government as kind of a weapon. And you follow his story going on military missions, but the man part of him, he's conflicted as far as how he's used in military warfare. This first volume, you're basically finding out his history, how he came to be, and then what he's being used for, and that conflict. And I feel like the second one, you're going to get more into that conflict. And we have the second volume, and I'll probably read it. I mean, they're little short graphic novels. We'll see how the second one goes, and then I'll probably make my decision then if I decided to carry on with the series. It was engaging enough, easy to read. The artwork is quite detailed and beautiful, and when you're talking about kind of his history of where he came from, it is one color palette, and then present day, you have another color palette, quite detailed. Lots of violence in here, lots of blood, very graphic violence. If that's your cup of tea, then go ahead and pick it up. I gave volume 1 of Brzrkr by the lovely Keanu Reeves 3 stars. The next book I read is Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes. This one I listened to, and it is narrated by the author, and I think she did a really, really good job. This is also longlisted for the Women's Prize, but I think this was a pretty popular one. I think Natalie Haynes is a social media darling with the books that she writes. She writes a lot of mythological retellings. She did, I believe, 1,000 Ships. But this is my first Natalie Haynes, and I enjoyed it. Now, this one, if you don't already know, is a retelling, reimagining of Medusa's story. As you know, Medusa is kind of known as a villain of Greek mythology. This one takes another tack about telling her story. Ultimately, I enjoyed this story. The only problem that I had with it was that there are a lot of characters. I've heard some people say that a lot of the characters were unnecessary. I disagree with that because all of these characters are connected in some way. And it all comes back to Medusa. And another problem that I've heard other people talk about is that Medusa is only featured in, say, I don't know, I think a lot of people say like 30% of the story. I would say it's a little bit more. I would say it's more like 40 to 45%. But when you have a story that's marketed as a Medusa retelling, you expect Medusa to feature more in the story. But the thing of it is what happens to Medusa and why it happens to Medusa has a lot to do with all these other characters and these tales of revenge and betrayal and why Medusa ends up the way she does. It's all connected. But for me personally, I had a hard time. I think the author did a really good job as far as I understood each character and who they were and what their characteristics were, what their character traits were, and how their traits added to the story. My problem that I had was sometimes I got a little lost in what their relationships and connections to the other characters were. Now, not so much that I was completely lost in the story. I think it's written in such a way that even if you lose the thread a little bit, it picks up and you're like, oh yeah, okay, so that makes sense. Now, if you have a working knowledge of Greek mythology, I think you will enjoy the story a little bit more than someone who doesn't have any working knowledge of it at all, with very, very minimal. I mean, the only thing I knew about Medusa is she had snakes for hair, and if you made eye contact with her, you turned to stone. And you have Zeus, who's the father of all the gods, and he's married to Hera. But as far as like the fates, I was unaware of. And so I will say that I learned a lot about the gods and goddesses, and I'll say that I'm probably a little bit stronger when it comes to watching Jeopardy now, if that category comes up. I will say the dialogue I enjoyed very much. It was snappy, it was witty, and it was contemporary. She didn't use like the vernacular of the time that is not as enjoyable for me personally. She had characters talk to each other like people talk to each other. Sarcasm and wittiness was not dated, and I really, really enjoyed that. I enjoyed how she had her characters talk to each other. So as I said before, this was my first Natalie Haynes. It won't be my last. I do like her writing style. I feel like I might have had a better time if I read the physical book, just so I can check back, because I do remember even in the audio at the very beginning, there is a list of characters, but of course that's so much easier to reference back to in a physical copy. So I probably would have rated this book higher had I read the physical copy. That's just how it goes. But overall, I really did enjoy Stoneblind. I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This is all over Booktube. I feel like I'm the last one to have read it, and I'm so glad I did. I found this at a little free library, and so it was added to my physical library, and then I picked this from my TBR game that I do. If you're unfamiliar with my TBR game, I'll link my most recent one down below. So if you don't know, this follows 4 elderly folks who are unlikely friends living in a retirement village. They get together every Thursday and they kind of rehash cold cases and try to solve them, until one day a murder actually happens close by and they involve themselves in this murder with the local police. This is a cozy mystery, and I don't read a whole lot of cozy mysteries, but I really, really enjoyed this. This is worth the hype. It's just cute. It's easy to read. Characters are adorable. I will say at the very beginning, I was a little bit annoyed by one of the characters, Elizabeth. She's kind of like the leader of the group. She really sticks her nose where it doesn't belong in the police business, and that was kind of annoying to me at first, but then she's just so endearing. They all are. Ultimately, I just had a good time with this. It's a good mystery. There's actually 2 murders that happen and they appear connected. There's just some twists and turns that you don't expect that are just fun, and they make sense. Just all the characters are just fun in a way that makes a cozy mystery really, really good. I enjoyed the structure of the book too. The chapters are super short, mostly told in third person. But it's interspersed with chapters that are first person by Joyce, one of the 4, who is writing a journal about events. So not only are you getting kind of an overall look of what's happening in the third person chapters, but then you're kind of getting an inside look as well from Joyce's point of view, which I enjoyed. The dialogue is super funny. I found myself laughing out loud a couple of times. It's just super cute because these 4 people, if it wasn't for the Thursday Murder Club, they probably wouldn't be friends, but they have like a mutual respect for each other, but they're a little bit snarky with each other as well, and it's just funny. It's cute. I miss my grandpa. I will definitely be reading the next in the series and the next after that. It's just adorable, and the mystery is a solid mystery. I gave the Thursday Murder Club 4 stars. So I'm ending this video kind of on a sour note, but it's the last book I read in the first half of the month, and I like to talk about the books chronologically, but then also I have a little bit more to say, not only about the book specifically, but its place on the Women's Prize for Fiction. So the last book that I read in the first half of April is Homesick by Jennifer Croft. I listened to this book as well. Here's what I know. How accurate it is, who knows? But here's what I know based on relatively little research that I did. Just enough research that I could do and what I found. This book was originally published in a language other than English. I'm not sure what language it was published in. And it was published in 2019. When I found that out, immediately I was a little annoyed that it made it onto the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction long list. I believe the cutoff for each year is April to April, roughly. I'm not sure the exact dates, but it's 1 year that the book has to be published to be eligible. So this one didn't meet that. So I'm a little annoyed by that. The other thing that annoyed me is that it was originally published as a memoir. As a matter of fact, when you look, the cover says Homesick, a memoir. And a memoir is not fiction. I was annoyed by the fact that a memoir made the 2023 long list Women's Prize for Fiction. It has been, I guess, reworked. Some few details changed, the names changed, and it was reworked as a fiction. And that's how it became eligible, but still, I'm a little annoyed by that. And I wasn't planning on reading this for those reasons, but it's very, very short. I think the audiobook is only 4 hours, and I do want to read as much from the long list. And so anyways, I listened to it, and it's kind of a strange format. So really quickly, you're following Zoe and Amy. Amy is the narrator of the story. Amy is the author, really. She is telling the story about how she grew up with her younger sister, Zoe, who started having seizures as a young girl. This story follows Amy and her guilt because her life is going in one direction, and her younger sister, who she adores, her life is going in an entirely different direction because of her medical issues. And the way the book is structured is it's interspersed with photographs that Amy, or Jennifer Croft, has taken. You can tell in the photographs that they're real pictures taken in real life. But the audio book comes with a PDF file where you can look at these photographs, which I liked. There actually are quite beautiful photographs, and I thought that was a unique addition to an audiobook. Usually when I listen to an audiobook, I'm on the move. I'm walking a dog, I'm driving. So when you're listening to the book and she says, there is a photograph of, and she describes the photograph, so there's that. But of course you want to see the photograph. I found that kind of inconvenient. And as far as the story itself, I just wasn't engaged. I feel bad about saying this because this really is a memoir. This is someone's actual story. I just didn't find myself connected to Amy, to Zoe. I didn't find myself gravitate towards their relationship as sisters that I normally do. I really do usually like a good sister story. Not this one. I just didn't really, I don't want to say I didn't care. It just wasn't a story for me. I gave Homesick, a memoir, 2 stars. So that is it. Those are the books that I read in the first half of April. Have you read any of these books? What did you think about them? What did you think about what I thought about them? I would love to know about it. What books have you read in April that you are loving? Are you reading the Women's Prize for Fiction as well? I would love to hear about it. Or you can just say hi down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.